After being hit by the demon's attack, Vikir found himself in a very dark place. He clenched his fists tightly and kept his eyes shut. After a while, he opened them, his gaze firm with determination. He wasn't ready to give up. He stood in a small, water-filled tunnel. In front of him sat a group of people with their arms resting on their knees. Vikir looked at them, confused. He didn't know what was happening or where he was. The people seemed sad, and none of them had faces. He remembered being pulled into Dantalian's ability, and realized this must be its effect. Questions filled his mind as he observed them. Were these people the ones the demon had devoured? His thoughts were interrupted when veins began appearing on his face and spread toward his eyes. A wave of fear hit him. The green water flowing through the tunnel seemed poisonous. Slowly, the veins expanded across his body. The water started shaking, creating small waves. Vikir glanced again at the people taken by Dantalian, and unease filled him. It felt the same as when Dantalian's face had been imprinted on him. The water seemed to stir his memories and bring up past traumas. He began to see pieces of others' lives. People who had killed loved ones, lost their sanity, or been consumed by evil. Among them was a small, sorrowful boy. Tears filled the boy's eyes as he begged Vicir not to hurt him, saying he didn't want to die. Veins now covered Vikir's body. He approached the boy, placed a gentle hand on his head, and tried to comfort him. The boy stopped crying, and Vikir gazed at the ground with a distant look. Slowly, he stood up. Perry's face flashed in his mind, the moment Dantalian had attacked. Vikir lifted his head, determination returning to his eyes. The tunnel seemed endless, filled with the demon's victims. Vikir concluded that if these people were here, then Perry might be too. Among the victims, he noticed children whose faces were filled with fear. Some were terrified of dying, while others looked completely worn out. Many had lost the will to stay in this place and longed for death. After Vicir was swallowed by Dantalian's attack, it wasn't long before Dolores suffered the same fate. She couldn't resist the power of the demon and was consumed by his assault. When she arrived in the strange place, she was stunned to see a crowd of people in front of her. Shocked, she began to wonder what kind of place this was. The cries and desperate pleas of the people overwhelmed her, filling her with guilt and sorrow. She soon realized these were the tormented spirits of those who had been devoured by Dantalian. Unable to cope, she dropped to her knees, staring at the ground, trying to process the horrifying reality. As she knelt there, a figure emerged from the water and began walking toward her. The figure asked what the saintess thought of his collection of human souls. Fear and despair gripped Dolores, leaving her frozen in place. Then, the demon Dantalian appeared behind her, revealing his true form. His face was a grotesque mask of tentacles, and his eyes gleamed with excitement. Spreading his arms wide and smiling cruelly, he explained that, after much thought, he had decided not to consume humans, as they were too despicable for his taste. A wicked grin spread across his face, and he gazed at Dolores with twisted delight, saying the cries and pleas of humans moved his heart. Dantalian was no ordinary demon. He was the 9th corpse among the Elite 10, with an S+ danger level. He dwelled deep within the Gate of Destruction, known as the Womb of the Serpent, and was considered one of humanity's greatest enemies, a disaster impossible to understand or kill. As Dolores knelt, staring at the ground, rage began to boil within her. Among the victims, she recognized children from the orphanage. The thought of such a monstrous crime was unbearable. Dantalian noticed her fury and coldly remarked that feeding didn't require justification. Reaching into his suit, he pulled out a golden indulgence paper and declared with a smirk that he couldn't be blamed because of this indulgence. He mocked her further, explaining how humans had invented the idea that money could erase sin, a concept that delighted him. Proudly, he added that humans had also inspired his methods of raising and harvesting orphan children for food, much like livestock. "If I've sinned," he said mockingly, "then it's because I've learned so much from humans." Dolores remained silent, still staring at the ground, overwhelmed by anger and grief. Dantalian stepped closer, observing her with a cruel smile. He then taunted her, accusing her of being no different from the wicked people who harmed others. She was simply lucky to be born with divine powers, but deep down, she felt weak, useless, and like a burden to others. Dantalian's tentacles crept toward her head, and with a wicked grin, He told her that without her, trapping the Night Hound in this inner world would have been impossible. Her presence had weakened the Night Hound, making it easier for him. Dolores stayed silent, and the demon found it thrilling to see the Saintess unable to respond. In his mental world, the negativity of the dead consumed everything, and he eagerly waited to see despair overtake her expression. But then, Dolores turned to him with a confident look. She calmly admitted that he wasn't wrong. She explained that indulgence, allowing weaknesses to linger, could harm others. Her own flaws were part of human nature, and together, these weaknesses built up to create despair. Hearing this, Dantalian laughed maniacally. His excitement grew as he agreed, saying it was true that humans were weak. Dolores turned her back to him, tears in her eyes. Her body began to glow with golden energy as divine power surrounded her. With confidence, she asked Dantalian if he truly thought despair couldn't lead to something better. She revealed that even despair could become a source of strength. Seeing her divine power, Dantalian stepped back, covering his face with his hands. He looked confused and on edge, unable to understand how her body was radiating divine power. Dolores, still crying, thanked him with a grateful expression. She admitted that, thanks to him, she now realized how indecisive she had been. She had been scared of her father, which had kept her from putting an end to indulgence. She had been so terrified of demons that she failed to help Night Hound and left him to fight alone. Now, she saw how useless she had been until this moment. She remembered a conversation from the past. She and Vikir were sitting on a wooden fence, gazing at nature. Dolores had asked him why God chose someone as weak as her to be the Saintess. There were many people with stronger faith who weren't born with divine powers. Why her? Vikir had been silent at first, thinking. Then he calmly told her that her suffering and repentance might be the reason God chose her. This world needed someone who could shine brightest in its darkest, most brutal moments. His words left Dolores speechless, but they stayed with her. Back in the present, Dolores clasped her hands tightly. Divine power began pouring out of her, growing stronger and brighter. She couldn't let Vikir fight alone anymore. With determination, she unleashed an immense wave of divine power that expanded in all directions, radiating hope and strength. She was determined to help no matter what. Seeing her determination, the demon raised his hands to cover his face, looking alarmed and unable to hide his concern. He couldn't let her keep using her divine power like this. Desperate to stop her, Dantalian told her that while the humans here might survive, the souls expelled by her divine power would be destroyed forever. But Dolores didn't listen. She focused even harder, and the divine power began to destroy the victims' souls. Clenching her teeth, she prayed without stopping, refusing to let the demon's words shake her. Just as she was about to give up, someone touched her hand. Surprised, she opened her eyes to see one of the orphanage children, who had been consumed by the demon, staring directly into her eyes. More children from the orphanage appeared, smiling warmly and encouraging her not to give up. Tears filled Dolores's eyes as guilt overwhelmed her. She begged the children for forgiveness for not being able to save them. Their presence renewed her strength, and she prayed even harder. Her divine power grew stronger, spreading out and freeing all the trapped souls. The demon stood frozen in shock. Meanwhile, deep in a nearby tunnel, a blonde-haired girl named Perry sat with a distant, blank expression, staring at the ground. Vicir arrived soon after and sat behind her, placing his hands on the ground and feeling relieved to have found her. But the weight of the victim's traumas and memories had begun to consume him. Looking at her with guilt in his eyes, Vicir explained that he'd been thinking about why he wanted to see her again. His face started to break apart, and his fear and regret showed clearly. He confessed that he had once sworn to spend his life seeking revenge against demons. When he first came to the orphanage, his only goal had been to hunt them, never caring about the lives affected. But something had changed. He remembered sitting under a tree with Perry and how her smile had filled him with gratitude. Because of the orphanage, he had met her. Her smile had given his revenge purpose. With weary eyes, he told her that the meaning of his revenge was to create a future where children like her could live in a world safe enough for them to smile again. The divine power of Dolores spread throughout the tunnel, and Vikir silently thanked Perry for giving meaning to his journey. The light of the divine power began to glow around her body. Vikir apologized for failing to protect her. Perry seemed surprised to see him there again. When she spoke, Vikir froze in shock. He couldn't believe he had heard Peri's voice. As the divine power expanded, it began freeing the souls trapped in the tunnel. Turning around, Vikir saw Peri crying, while the other children smiled. Peri sobbed harder, thanking him for coming because she had been so afraid. Seeing her like this, the weight of the victim's trauma began lifting from Vikir's mind, freeing him from the poison that had burdened him. Overwhelmed, Vicir hugged her tightly without hesitation. As the divine power continued to free the souls, Vicir closed his eyes and made a promise. He would never forgive the one who had made Peri suffer. Peri smiled through her tears, thanking him once again. The power of Dolores grew so strong that the windows of the orphan dormitories glowed intensely. The demon shielded his eyes to avoid being blinded and was thrown backward by the force. He watched the saintess warily, realizing just how powerful she had become. Dolores, now fully awakened, rose to her feet. Vicir stood beside her. Dantalion, the demon, looked on in shock, seeing that she had purified the mental world and all the trapped souls. She clasped her hands, closed her eyes, and let her power flow again, spreading throughout the area. Vicir, standing by her side, focused his gaze on the demon. He felt Dolores's divine power surround him, and when he looked at his palm, he was surprised to see energy radiating from his body. He clenched his fist, and the energy around him grew stronger. His aura, amplified by Dolores's divine power, became overwhelming. Though he was a rank 6 swordsman, Vicir was confident her support would help him reach rank 7. He lowered his hand, concentrating deeply, and his aura solidified like stone. Drawing his sword, Beelzebub, he saw it was now cloaked in the powerful aura. Seeing this, Dantalion retreated several steps, alarmed. He recognized the aura of a sword master and braced himself. Vicir assumed an offensive stance, his rage and thirst for revenge evident in his fiery gaze. Clenching his teeth, he glared at the demon and declared coldly that Dantalion would not die peacefully.